Technically, not terrible. Chapter 1, Cheerily. It was out of respect for her students that Cheerily didn't start drinking until after she had graded all of their homework, despite the temptation. College hasn't really prepared her for the reality of teaching. Her first student-teacher position had been gentle, in hindsight, and from there it had progressed into an inexplicable downward spiral. It wasn't that her students were stupid, far from it. Many of them were smart and creative and just plain awful at the basics. She did try her best to help them focus on what they were good at, as long as it was productive, of course. Encouraging Diamond Tiara at her bullying was not useful for society, despite her talent. It was that every year they seemed less skilled at mouth writing or horn writing or composing complete sentences. They surely were capable of it, but she had no idea what it was. She couldn't blame a previous teacher since there were none to blame. Parents, maybe. Some big cities had a problem with teachers serving in lieu of actual parents, and that could be trickling down to Ponyville, or maybe she was just getting more cynical as the years passed. That was certainly a possibility. She sighed and picked up the next essay up off the pile, her eye twitching at the scrawling writing. Scootaloo's work, without a question, and it was long. Scootaloo had a tendency to forget to put in vowels when she was writing in a hurry, and she also kind of skipped bumps and letters that had bumps, saving time by replacing them with a straight line.
If I ever decide to change careers, I'll work in a pharmacy.
Cheerily squinted down at the essay, unconsciously wondering how soon Rainbow Dash would be mentioned, despite the Weathermare's lack of relevance in an essay about the equestrian economy. To her surprise, it wasn't until page 2. And to her further surprise, the essay was largely on point, so long as she ignored every mention of how awesome Rainbow was. Scootaloo had a tenuous grasp of how weather affected every pony, and therefore influenced Equestria's economy. Although, her understanding of how many ponies actually made it work was far more tenuous. Cheerily shrugged. Despite the poor penmanship and the blatant idolization, it wasn't technically terrible. She scrolled a B across the top and moved to the next essay in the pile. Chapter 2, Proper Prim. Proper Prim didn't really need to check her notes. She knew the show inside and out. She lived with it and breathed with it, and for the entire length of the run, from the first audition to the final curtain, it was her full, and hers alone, regardless of how many big-name ponies were up on the marquee or how many extras and stage hooves she had. She was the big swinging dick, and every pony knew it. She leaned down and whispered into the crystal mic.
Stand by for lowering the swing.
In response, silence. Again.
Stand by for lowering swing.
More silence. Nothing but a faint white noise in her earpiece. She looked towards the stage. Even if the crystal radio had broken, all the stage hooves knew their roles. They'd been drilled into them, but the swing stayed out of sight, still up in the catwalks.
Act 2, set.
The radio whispered into her ear.
Lightboard, standing by. Soundboard, standing by.
She couldn't delay the act. Her focus narrowed. A set of stairs in the tech booth led to the catwalks. Proper Prim keyed her mic.
Act 2, go. Lights. Cue complete. Sound complete.
As soon as the stage lights came up and there was a noise below, she pushed the door open with her muzzle and set out onto the catwalks. Somewhere out there, a pony was shirking her duty. For just a moment, a gentle smile played across her face, despite the discomfort, despite the altitude, despite the noise of the play below. Her stage hoof was sound asleep on the catwalk. She had her earpiece in, and for all the good it had done. She made it as far as the swing before succumbing to slumber. One hoof rested lightly onto the prop. A rare moment of maternal instinct flickered in Proper Prim. Her stage hooves worked so hard and, in many ways, were the unsung heroes of the show. Then that thought was buried deep. She missed a cue, which was not to be done. Proper Prim poked her stage hoof, and by the time the guilty party had snapped out of her slumber, Proper Prim had a stern frown etched across her face.
Swing, stand by.
Giving the cue was rubbing salt in the wound. But she did it anyway. Her stage hoof scrambled, looking at the stage below.
Swing, go.
It lowered over the edge, sliding into place, and the analytical part of Proper Prim's mind knew full well that the audience had no idea the cue had been missed. She tapped the off-ending stage hoof on the forehead.
You can sleep later. Pay attention. Yes, ma'am.
Was the meek reply. For a moment, her facade slipped.
At least it wasn't a flat falling over.
Proper decreed.
So, it's technically not terrible.
Chapter 3, Virtuoso. Virtuoso's ears pinned back at the discordant shriek of the electric guitar. Ponies were generally at least somewhat musical in nature, although, judging by the first standing notes of agony from the instrument, there were clear exceptions. He raced back into the metal section of his music store before the Orange Pegasus could commit another crime against harmony. To his good fortune, she'd moved onto a quieter instrument, the drum set. One drumstick held in her mouth, she began headbanging. Her hoof drove the bass drum, and her head chose between the cymbals or snare seemingly at random. Despite the unskilled enthusiasm, he couldn't help but tap his hoof. She was unskilled in using the drum set wrong. But she technically wasn't terrible. Chapter 4, 5K Nap. Miss Harshwini eyed the bed, a regulation mattress where the 5K nap was nearing completion. The competitors were sacked out in varying positions. Many were opting for the belly, a few were on their sides, and a rarer few sprawled out on their backs. A Pegasus had her head tucked beneath her wing. Bold. Although, wing moves risked points being docked. That was in the rules. And then, there was Lyra. Her position was an affront to equinety. Ponies just shouldn't bend that way. And if they did, they shouldn't be able to sleep that way. Kinematics practically prohibited it, to the point where there had not been a rule prohibiting it. As much as duration earned points, so too did form, and Lyra wasn't very much off form. The Nap Guide rulebook was quite clear about that. And yet, it was working for her. She was completely out, a faint smile on her muzzle, and she dreamed. And that kind of dedication counted for something, even if it was something that was technically not terrible. Which was actually an award because of course it was. Chapter 5, Novalember 2.
So,
Applejack tried to hide her eager expression.
what do you think? Well,
Twilight set the manuscript down and rubbed the bridge of her nose.
you promised your next Novalember fic would have airplanes. And boy, howdy does it. Yes,
Twilight nodded.
it does. I see a bit of a frown. Well, it's technically not terrible.
Twilight said.
It's thematically connected to the first, with your same self-insert protagonist, but I'll be completely honest, I like the first one better. Your character was fresh and new, and the idea of a hostage situation during hearths warming inside a Napony's office tower was creative. This feels like you're reaching too hard. Well, maybe I did.
Applejack admitted.
I do have an idea for a third one, though. Oh? I'll be teaming up with a zebra and solving riddles to stop the Flam Brothers as he tries to rob the Manhattan Gold Repository. Really? And it's gonna involve trucks. And a train.
Twilight sighed.
Well, you've sold me.
Chapter 7, Peach Wine. And what is this? Peachy Keen swallowed a lump in her throat.
It's peach wine, if it pleases you.
Big Mac frowned. It's technically not terrible. He passed the glass to his sister. AJ, what do you think? She took a sip.
Fruity, that's a plus. High proof, another plus, but it's peach. Therefore, I too return a neutral verdict. Apple bloom?
The youngest apple took a taste.
Meh, from me.
That's 3 neutral votes, Big Mac said. You know the rules. Peachy Keen nodded.
To the elder.
To the elder. The younger apple siblings reverently passed the glasses to Granny Smith, who took one sip and spit it out onto the floor.
Pah! Peach! Off with her head!
Applejack shrugged and picked up her sword.
Well, sorry, but you heard the verdict.
Chapter 8, The Worst possible thing.
This is the worst possible thing.
Rarity groused.
I don't know.
Pinkie Pie replied.
This one time, at band camp, I just dropped a stitch.
Rarity grumbled.
Never mind that, Ro.
Pinkie looked back into the water around them, where the unmistakable dorsal fins of sharks patrolled.
Why are you even sewing on a boat? It's what I do. It's all I do. I'm prim and proper and a fashion horse and totally one-dimensional. Let it all out. And that's it. Really? No, not really.
Rarity reached under the pile of fabric and pulled forth a Thompson machine gun.
Die, motherfuckers!
Her words were mostly lost in the rattle of the gun. Pinkie sat in the stern and watched as the water turned into a pink froth. Yeah, it was bad for the sharks, but in terms of their own survival, it was technically not terrible. My voice died out like halfway through that. I can't do female voices today. Shit.